Emily, we don't have that kind of money sitting around. You have to face reality. My father's voice was flat as he blocked the doorway of my small apartment, arms folded tightly, eyes hard. My mother lingered just behind him, lips pressed together in silent agreement. I stayed by the kitchen counter, aware of the faint hum of the oxygen machine from the next room, where my 7-year-old son, Ethan, slept fitfully. Unpaid medical invoices covered the table like a painful reminder of everything I couldn't fix. $85,000. That was the figure the specialist had quoted for the experimental procedure that might keep Ethan alive. His rare heart defect no longer responded to standard treatments, and the doctor warned that time was slipping away. I'm Emily, 31 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio. I teach middle school science and raise Ethan by myself. His father left 4 years ago, right after the diagnosis, unable to cope with having a sick child. Since then, I've faced this fight alone. My parents live just 20 minutes away in their quiet suburban home, the same one where my younger sister Claire still occupies her carefully preserved childhood bedroom. Realistic? I echoed, my voice unsteady. He'll die without it. The doctor said 6 months, maybe less, if nothing changes. My mother reached for my father's arm, the familiar gesture she used when she wanted to soften his words without challenging him. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "we know how hard this is, but we've already done so much. We covered 3 of his surgeries. We can't drain our retirement funds," my father muttered. "I'm not asking you to drain them," I said quietly. "I'm asking for a loan. I'll repay every cent. I'll take another job if I have to. I'll find a way." My father sighed and shook his head. "Emily, you're already stretched to the limit. How could you possibly pay us back? You need to think logically." He mentioned payment plans and medical loans, urging me to explore those options again. But I already had. I'd spent endless nights combing through every possibility, only to learn that the so-called solutions were useless. The installment plans dragged on for years my son didn't have, and the financing companies demanded interest rates that would trap me in debt for life, assuming they even approved me, which most wouldn't. "I've tried everything," I whispered. "You're all I have left." My mother's expression softened for a heartbeat, and I thought she might sway him. But then he spoke again, unyielding. "We can't, Emily. We're sorry, but we have to think about our own future. We're getting older." A few minutes later they were gone, and I stood by the window, watching their taillights fade into the distance. The rejection pressed down on me like something heavy and airless. I went to Ethan's room and sank onto the edge of his bed. The oxygen machine hissed steadily as his small chest lifted and fell with uneven effort. He looked peaceful, completely unaware that his grandparents had just turned away from him. The next morning, I began calling everyone I could, extended relatives, old family friends, anyone who might possibly help. Most offered only kind words and modest gestures that barely touched the surface. Aunt Teresa mailed a $500 check with an apologetic note saying she wished she could give more. I was grateful, but it felt like trying to fill the ocean with a spoon. 2 weeks later, after a grueling day teaching, I came home to find Ethan gasping for air, his lips edged with blue. Panic took over. I called an ambulance and they rushed him to the ER. He was stabilized, but when Dr. Morrison approached me, his face told me everything before he spoke. "His condition is worsening faster than expected," he said quietly. "Without the treatment we discussed, I'd estimate he has about 3 months left." "Maybe even less," Dr. Morrison added. I could only nod. The words lodged behind the ache in my throat. 3 months, that was all my little boy had left, unless I somehow found $85,000. That night, I created a crowdfunding page, pouring everything I had into the story. I wrote about Ethan's laughter before the illness, posted photos of his bright eyes and mischievous grin, and begged strangers to help me save him. Friends shared it, colleagues from school chipped in. A few parents of my students sent small donations. After 2 weeks, the total stood at $12,000, a fraction of what was needed. Then my sister Claire called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Emily, I have the best news. Jeffrey proposed. We're getting married. I forced a smile into my words. That's wonderful, Claire. Congratulations. I know. And Mom and Dad are being amazing. They're paying for the entire wedding. No spending limit at all. Can you believe it? We're thinking Italy or maybe the south of France. It's going to be perfect. My grip tightened on the phone. No budget limits? None, she said cheerfully. Dad told me his little girl deserves the best. We're meeting wedding planners next week, even though it's still a year away. We want everything just right. I stood in my cramped apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and the steady hum of Ethan's oxygen machine, and listened to her gush about her dream wedding. Something cold settled inside me, a realization that hardened into something sharper with time. The months that followed blurred together. Endless hospital stays, new bills arriving daily, and the constant fear that each day might be Ethan's last. I maxed out every credit card, took out desperate loans, and sold everything I owned that held any value. My grandmother's ring, the only keepsake my mother had given me, fetched $800 at a pawn shop. I traded my car for an ancient sedan that coughed every time it started and downsized to a tiny studio apartment. Meanwhile, Claire's wedding plans grew larger and grander, moving forward with the unstoppable momentum of a storm I could no longer watch without feeling something inside me fracture. Every dinner, every call, every casual chat eventually turned into another conversation about the wedding. My parents were completely absorbed in it, sampling gourmet menus, touring villas in Tuscany through video calls, debating over floral designs that cost more than my monthly paycheck. I told myself I was happy for Claire. I tried to be. She was my little sister, and once upon a time we'd been inseparable. But that bond had eroded as the years revealed how differently our parents viewed us. Claire was the golden one, the shining example who never stumbled, honors graduate, successful marketing career, always dating the kind of men who came from respectable families. And then there was me, the daughter who got pregnant at 23, married the wrong man, became a teacher instead of chasing money, and now had a sick child she couldn't save. One hot evening in July, my mother called. "Emily, sweetheart, we need to discuss the wedding." I rubbed my eyes, drained after teaching summer classes and spending hours at the hospital. "What about it?" "Well, Claire wants you as a bridesmaid, of course. The dresses are around $300, so you'll need to place your order soon." 300. I calculated automatically, nearly 2 weeks' worth of Ethan's medication. "I'm not sure I can manage that right now," I said quietly. A pause stretched on the line before she replied, her tone tightening. "Emily, this is your sister's wedding. I know, Mom, but things are really hard right now. Ethan's medical bills—" "Oh, Emily," she cut in sharply. "You're always talking about Ethan's medical bills. I know he's sick, but the rest of us still have lives to live. It's Claire's big day, Emily." I shut my eyes, fighting back the frustration tightening my chest. "Can I at least think about it?" "Of course," my mother replied. "But the order deadline is next week. Claire really wants you in the bridal party. It would mean so much to her." After we hung up, I sat alone in the dim light of my small studio, tears slipping down my face. How had things reached this point? My child was dying, and my family's biggest concern was the color of bridesmaid dresses and the arrangement of tables. Ethan's condition worsened steadily. By the time I scraped together enough for another consultation, the experimental treatment was no longer an option. We'd missed the window. The doctors shifted their focus to comfort care, managing his pain instead of fighting the disease. Each day I watched him fade, his energy, his laughter, his dreams of returning to school or becoming a scientist. He stopped asking about the future altogether, as if he instinctively understood there wasn't much of it left. I took an unpaid leave from teaching so I could stay by his side. My principal was compassionate, but compassion didn't cover rent. My finances collapsed completely. I filled out application after application for grants, aid programs, and medical charities. Most replied with waiting lists that stretched for months or restrictions that ruled us out entirely. By September, 5 months after my parents had turned me away, Claire's bachelorette weekend took place. My mother called afterward, her voice bright with excitement. They had rented a luxurious villa in Napa Valley for 12 of Claire's closest friends, everything covered by my parents. There were vineyard tours, spa days, even a private chef, she gushed. It was absolutely magical. Claire was glowing, Emily. You should have seen her face. I hesitated, then asked quietly, "How much did it cost?" "Oh, I'm not sure of the exact amount," my mother said breezily. "Your father handled it all. Maybe around 10,000? But it was worth every penny to see Claire so happy. $10,000, more than a tenth of what could have saved my son, gone in a weekend. Something deep within me gave way, a quiet breaking point I hadn't realized I was approaching. That sounds wonderful, I replied, my voice flat. You know, Emily, she continued, I really wish you'd show a little more enthusiasm about this wedding. Claire feels you're not being supportive. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Claire feels I'm not supporting her? She does, my mother insisted. She says you've been distant, and you still haven't confirmed about being a bridesmaid. I told you, Mom, I can't afford the dress, she sighed, exasperated. Well, maybe if you managed your finances better, you wouldn't always be in this situation. The words hit like acid, managed my finances better, as if my son's medical bills were the result of careless spending instead of desperation, as if my struggle to keep him alive was a moral failure, while they poured money into parties and floral arrangements. I have to go, I said tightly. Ethan needs me. Of course he does, she replied, her voice laced with judgment. But Emily, maybe if you didn't focus so much on Ethan's issues, you might actually find some joy again. Look at Claire. She balances everything beautifully. I ended the call without another word. By October, the first cold winds arrived, cutting straight through me. Ethan's hospital stays became more frequent, his tiny body losing the strength to fight. The doctors began speaking softly about weeks instead of months. I spent every waking moment at his side, reading his favorite stories, whispering about what heaven might be like, holding his hand when the pain came. My parents visited occasionally, never for long. 20 minutes at most, just enough to pat his hand, murmur something polite, and leave looking relieved to escape the sterile air of the pediatric ward. Their lives were still full of tastings, fittings, and planning sessions for the perfect wedding. Claire came once. She appeared in the doorway, immaculate as ever, flawless makeup, tailored clothes that cost more than my rent. She barely lasted 5 minutes before saying she had to rush to a dress fitting. He's so thin, she whispered in the hallway, as if she were discovering it for the first time. Yes, I said quietly. It must be so hard for you. She reached out and touched my arm, a gesture that might have been meant as comfort, though it felt rehearsed, hollow. You're so strong, Emily, she said softly. You always have been. Strong. That word had been thrown at me for months, offered like a compliment when it really meant we're glad it's you and not us. Strong enough to survive without help. Strong enough to bear the unbearable. Strong enough to watch my child fade away while the rest of them spent more on centerpieces than I'd ever earned in a year. The wedding's in 3 weeks, Claire went on brightly. I really hope you'll change your mind about being a bridesmaid. It would mean so much to me, and honestly, it might do you some good, a little happiness, a break from all this. A break, as though grief were a job I could clock out of, as though I could put on a smile and a designer dress and forget that my son was dying by inches. I'll think about it, I told her, the lie easier than trying to explain the truth. The invitations had arrived months earlier, thick, cream-colored cards with gold embossing that probably cost more than a week of Ethan's medication. My brain converted every wedding expense into the care he needed. The invitations alone could have covered a month of physical therapy. The venue deposit could have paid for an entire year of treatment. Later, I found out the total price tag for Claire's wedding, $230,000. That number lodged in my chest like a scream I couldn't release. They'd spent nearly triple the amount that could have saved Ethan's life on a single day. $80,000 for the venue, $15,000 for flowers, $40,000 for catering, $12,000 for her gown. I learned the figures bit by bit, through overheard remarks and my mother's offhand comments, each one cutting deeper. She seemed oblivious to how every detail gutted me. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe she just chose not to see it. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Ethan had one of his worst days yet. His tiny heart was giving out, alarms shrieking, nurses flooding the room. I stood at Ethan's bedside, clutching his frail hand, while the nurses and doctors worked frantically around him. The machines screamed, then slowly quieted as they managed to stabilize him, for now. When the chaos subsided, Dr. Morrison led me into the hallway, his expression gentle but final. "Emily," he said softly, "there isn't much time left. Days, maybe a week. You should call your family, anyone who'd want to say goodbye." I called my parents. My father answered, his tone harried and distracted. "Emily, we're in the middle of the rehearsal dinner setup. Can this wait?" "Ethan is dying," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "The doctor says it's a matter of days." There was a pause, a few heartbeats of silence before he replied, Oh, Emily. I'm so sorry. Do you need us to come? Do I need you to come?" My child, their grandson, was slipping away, and he was asking if it was necessary. "Yes," I said. "I think Ethan would want to see you." "Of course," he said. "We'll try to stop by tomorrow. We have the final venue walkthrough in the afternoon, but maybe in the morning." They showed up the next day at 10 sharp, Starbucks cups in hand. They stayed 15 minutes. Ethan was barely conscious, his breathing ragged even with the oxygen turned all the way up. My mother shed a few polite tears, blotting her eyes with a tissue that probably cost more than the breakfast I'd skipped. My father lingered by the door, glancing at his watch twice. "We should go," he finally said. "The florist's expecting us at 11. "The florist," I echoed blankly, "for the centerpieces." "It's important we get this right," my father said briskly. "There's no room for mistakes this close to the wedding." He didn't even seem to notice the cruel irony of those words, spoken in a hospital room where the real mistake, valuing appearances over love, was about to cost them their grandson. They left soon after, promising to come back, promises I already knew meant nothing. Claire never showed up at all. She was far too preoccupied with what she called wedding disasters, a sick cellist in her string quartet, last-minute catering mix-ups, endless phone calls about floral deliveries. Somehow, those things mattered more than saying goodbye. Ethan passed away early Tuesday morning, just 3 days before the wedding. He went quietly, his tiny hand wrapped in mine. The nurse who confirmed his death wept harder than either of my parents would when I called them. When I told my mother, there was a beat of silence before she said, "Oh no. Oh, Emily, no. What terrible timing, because his funeral would now interfere with their precious celebration." In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed into something sharper. The sorrow was unbearable, but beneath it, a steady, frozen calm began to spread. They had made their choice long ago, and now I would make mine. The funeral was set for Friday, 2 days before Claire's Sunday wedding. I didn't ask them to postpone or change anything. I already knew what their answer would be, and I couldn't bear to hear it out loud. What I didn't anticipate was them asking me to move the funeral. My mother called Wednesday evening, her tone careful. "Emily, sweetheart, we need to discuss the funeral plans." I sat in Ethan's room as she spoke, surrounded by his small, beloved things, the dinosaur poster above his bed, his collection of rocks from the park, the little world he'd built and left behind. The science kit I'd given Ethan last Christmas still sat unopened on his shelf, a reminder of everything he never got to do. "What about the funeral, Mom?" I asked, my voice low. "Well," she began, "Friday's going to be really difficult for us. We have the wedding rehearsal that afternoon and the dinner that night. Everything's already scheduled and paid for. Could you move the funeral to Thursday, or maybe next week?" For a moment, I just stared at the wall, unable to process what she was saying. You're asking me to reschedule my son's funeral because it interferes with wedding rehearsal? It's not just the rehearsal, Emily, she said quickly. It's the entire schedule. We've got guests flying in, Jeffrey's family from Atlanta for one, and your father is supposed to give a toast at dinner. We can't just not show up. Ethan was your grandson, I said quietly, and we'll honor him. Of course we will, she insisted. But Thursday would be easier for everyone. The funeral home should be able to work with you on that. Everyone, I repeated, my tone flat. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I'd moved past both into something hollow and still. You're saying it would be more convenient if I buried my 8-year-old son a day early so no one misses cocktail hour? Don't be so dramatic, Emily, she snapped. You're making this sound worse than it is. We're trying to support both you and Claire. Why can't you be more flexible? You know how important this wedding is to your sister. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The funeral stayed on Friday. I handled every detail myself, paying for it with a loan from my principal, a woman who'd shown me more compassion in 1 year than my own parents had in a lifetime. It was a quiet service, maybe 20 people in all. Aunt Teresa came, a few teachers, some parents of Ethan's old classmates. My parents arrived 45 minutes late, dressed in elegant clothes that looked suspiciously like they were chosen for wedding festivities. They sat through the ceremony, said nothing, and left immediately afterward, skipping the small reception I'd arranged back at my apartment. We really have to go, my mother said, brushing her lips against my cheek without warmth. Claire's having a meltdown about the seating chart. But it was a lovely service, Emily. Very tasteful. That was the word my mother had used. My son's funeral was tasteful. I stood there watching their car disappear down the street, heading off to whatever urgent wedding crisis awaited them, and something inside me hardened completely. The grief didn't vanish. It was still vast and suffocating, but it settled behind a wall of perfect, frozen clarity. Saturday passed in silence. I sat in my small apartment surrounded by sympathy cards, stacks of unpaid bills, and the ghosts of what used to be hope. The crowdfunding page had long since closed. The $12,000 raised had vanished months earlier into hospital payments that had bought only borrowed time. I now owed $73,000 in medical debt, another $25,000 on credit cards, and my rent was 2 months late. Ethan's death hadn't ended my suffering. It had only stripped away its purpose. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives and well-meaning friends asking if I was all right, if I needed anything. I didn't answer. What I needed couldn't be given. I needed my son. I needed parents who had chosen love over appearances. I needed this entire nightmare to have been a dream. Then came Sunday, Claire's wedding day. I woke before sunrise, numb and hollow, determined not to think about it. But my phone screen lit up with a text from my mother. "Wish you were here to share this special day. Claire looks absolutely stunning." I stared at the message for a long time. Wish you were here, as if I'd simply decided not to come, as if I wasn't there because of poor timing, not because 2 days earlier I'd lowered my child into the ground. I dressed mechanically and went out, wandering through the quiet streets of Columbus. Late October had painted the trees in gold and scarlet. Ethan had loved this season, the crunch of leaves, the smell of wood smoke, the excitement of choosing the perfect pumpkin. We were supposed to go this year, another promise left unfulfilled. My phone buzzed again and again as the day went on. Notifications stacked up, photos from the wedding, messages from the group chat my mother had so thoughtfully added me to. I watched them load, one after another. The Tuscan villa bathed in sunset light, Claire radiant in her designer gown, a dress worth more than my car, towering floral displays, a 5-tier cake glistening under chandeliers, a champagne tower sparkling beside the string quartet, performing on a terrace above the vineyards. $230,000 poured into a single day of beauty and excess, while my son rested in a simple grave I couldn't yet afford to mark with stone. I scrolled through the images in silence, detached, almost clinical. Everyone looked ecstatic. My father in his tuxedo, proud and glowing. My mother elegant and composed in a gown that must have cost thousands. Claire and her new husband, the picture of happiness, surrounded by family. The same family who had turned away when I'd begged for help. The same people who'd offered sympathy instead of action. I saw their smiling faces, champagne glasses raised high, and then one picture stopped me cold. My parents dancing, my mother's head thrown back in laughter, joy shining in every line of her face. The caption read, "Best day ever, so blessed." I set the phone down and walked to the bathroom, the light harsh and unforgiving. In the mirror, a stranger stared back, thinner, hollow-eyed, her face carved by sleepless nights. 15 pounds gone in a month, and a decade etched into her reflection. I looked like a woman who had buried her child while her family danced beneath fairy lights. That night, in the stillness of my studio apartment, I made myself a quiet vow. This wasn't finished. They believed they could erase Ethan's memory, erase me, and return to their charmed lives untouched. They thought money and reputation would protect them from guilt or consequence. They were wrong. I didn't yet know how, but I would make them understand. I would make them feel even a sliver of the agony they'd left me with. Not revenge, something purer, colder, justice, reckoning. I opened a notebook and began to write. Every exchange, every rejection, every amount of money. I traced the timeline, when I'd asked for help, when they'd refused, when Claire's wedding planning began, when Ethan's fight ended. I listed who came to the funeral, who didn't, and noted every extravagant detail my mother had ever mentioned about the wedding. I didn't know what form it would take, only that this record had to exist, evidence of everything that had been stolen from Ethan, from me, proof. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother, home from Italy, exhausted but so happy. Claire and Jeffrey's first dance was magical. "I'll send you the video." I typed back, "Glad you had a good time." The 3 dots blinked, disappeared, returned. And finally, "We'll come by next week to check on you. I'm sure you're feeling better by now." Feeling better. As if grief followed a timeline, as if a single week could heal the wound of losing a child, make me ready to hear more stories about a magical wedding. I didn't reply. The weeks that followed drifted by in a dull gray fog. I went back to work, moving through the halls like a ghost. My students were gentle, quieter around me than usual. The administration had offered extra bereavement leave, but I refused. I needed the rhythm of work, the structure, something to fill the endless hours that used to belong to Ethan's medications, doctor visits, and fragile hopes. My parents called now and then, their voices polite but distant. "How are you holding up?" they'd ask, before quickly shifting the conversation to Claire's honeymoon, their home renovations, or holiday plans. They never mentioned Ethan. It was as if he'd vanished, erased, because acknowledging him might taint their cheer. Claire sent one message. "I'm sorry about everything. I hope we can move past this. Move past this. Move past watching my son die while she planned floral arrangements. Move past being left to drown alone. Move past a wedding that cost $250,000, more than enough to save his life." I didn't respond. In December, 2 months after Ethan's death, my parents invited me for Christmas dinner. I nearly said no, but curiosity won. I needed to see them, to understand how they managed to live so easily after everything. Their house looked like a magazine spread, a towering 12-foot tree adorned by professionals, garlands winding up the staircase, lights glittering from every corner. The scent of catered food filled the air. Claire and Jeffrey were already there, glowing from their Bali honeymoon, sun-kissed and perfect. "Emily," my mother exclaimed, sweeping me into a perfumed embrace. "I'm so glad you came. We've missed you." I stood rigid in her arms. "Thank you for inviting me." Dinner was extravagant. Prime rib, lobster tails, side dishes I couldn't name. My father boasted about the wine, proudly noting it was $200 a bottle. The table buzzed with laughter and stories, wedding anecdotes, honeymoon adventures, updates about remodeling plans. I sat in silence, moving food around my plate. "You're awfully quiet, Emily," Claire said, her voice laced with false concern. "Are you okay?" I'm fine, I said evenly. You know, Claire began carefully, twirling her wine glass between manicured fingers. Jeffrey and I were talking. Maybe you should think about moving somewhere new. A fresh start could really help you heal. Columbus must be full of painful memories. I looked at her. This woman who shared my blood, but none of my understanding. And where exactly would I go? I don't know, she said brightly. Someplace cheaper, maybe? I know things are tight for you right now. Jeffrey's company has an office in Kansas City. The cost of living's way lower there. We could help you find something, help me. What she really meant was, move the reminder of your grief out of sight. I'll think about it, I said, the words hollow and practiced. My father cleared his throat, straightening his napkin. Emily, your mother and I have been talking about your finances. We think you should consider filing for bankruptcy. It's the sensible thing to do at this point. With all that debt, bankruptcy, I repeated. For the medical bills, he said, as if clarifying would make it sound reasonable. You'll never be able to pay that off on a teacher's salary. It's best to wipe the slate clean and start over, as though Ethan's life and death were a bad investment that needed to be written off. We can help you find a good attorney, my mother added helpfully. Your father knows several. I set my fork down slowly, my hands steady in a way my voice wasn't. You know what would have helped? $85,000. 15 months ago. The table went still. Claire shifted in her chair, her husband's hand tightening around hers. My mother's smile froze mid-expression, a mask she couldn't quite maintain. Emily, my father said finally, his tone edged with warning. We've been through this already. Have we? I asked quietly, because I don't remember a discussion. You said no, and that was the end of it. We made a hard decision based on our financial situation, he replied stiffly. Your financial situation, I echoed, sweeping a glance around the elegant dining room. This doesn't look like hardship to me. A $230,000 wedding doesn't exactly scream financial restraint. Claire's cheeks flushed crimson. That's not fair, Claire snapped, her voice trembling with indignation. Isn't it? I said, pushing back from the table so hard the chair scraped across their perfect hardwood floor. You spent nearly 3 times what could have saved Ethan's life on one single day. A party, flowers, cake, a dress you'll wear once. Emily, that's enough, my father barked, rising to his feet, face flushed. We made the decision we believed was right. We're not going to apologize for wanting your sister to be happy. And Ethan's life? I asked, my voice shaking. What about supporting that? He was sick, my mother said, tears welling in her eyes but not changing her tone. The doctor said there was no guarantee that treatment would work. We weren't going to throw away that kind of money on something that might not even help. But you did throw away twice that amount on flowers and party favors that ended up in the trash, I said quietly. Get out, my father snapped. If you can't be respectful, you can leave. I grabbed my coat. Don't worry. I'm going. You're just bitter because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted, Claire called after me, her voice sharp. It's not our fault you made bad choices. I stopped at the doorway and turned back. They were all standing now, my parents, my sister, her husband, a united wall of comfort and self-righteousness. Bad choices? I repeated. Like trusting my own family, like believing blood meant something, like thinking you'd ever choose your grandson over a party. Then I walked out into the freezing December night, the air biting at my face as I climbed into my battered old car. Through the window, I could see them already sitting back down, resuming their expensive meal, no doubt reassuring each other that I was just being dramatic. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 4 years. Life went on, because it always does. I filed for bankruptcy, just as my father had suggested, erasing the mountain of medical debt but shattering my credit for years. I moved into a smaller, cheaper apartment in a rougher part of town. I picked up tutoring jobs in the evenings and during the summer just to stay afloat. I was surviving, not living, but even in that numb routine, I began to plan. I couldn't go after them yet. I didn't have the strength, the means, or the clarity. Grief still ruled every corner of my life. But I waited. I watched. Patience became my closest ally. Through social media accounts they thought I no longer followed. I kept track of everything. Posts, photos, announcements. I added each new piece of information to my growing collection of notes. A year after the wedding, Claire got pregnant. My mother flooded her Facebook with updates: the baby shower, the gender reveal, the carefully curated nursery. When little Sophia was born, the pictures were everywhere. My parents grinning, cradling their first grandchild. As if Ethan had never existed. As if the boy who'd fought for every breath was just a forgotten footnote. A distant cousin commented, "Your first grandchild. How exciting." And my mother's reply, "Yes, we're over the moon." No correction, no mention of Ethan, just a seamless rewrite of history. I took a screenshot and added it to the file, another entry in the record of everything they'd chosen to erase. 2 years after Ethan's death, I started taking online classes at night, working toward a master's in education administration. By the 3rd year, I'd earned a promotion to assistant principal. The pay raise wasn't much, but it was something, a foothold, a step toward independence. I began to save obsessively, every spare dollar funneled into a separate account I never touched. I didn't yet know the form my plan would take, but I understood one truth: real power required preparation and money. During those years, my parents made occasional attempts at contact. Birthday cards with short, impersonal messages, Christmas packages mailed without notes, tokens of obligation, not love. Usually, the packages they sent contained gift cards for stores I never set foot in, polite gestures that meant nothing. My father called once, his tone casual, to tell me they'd started a small college fund for Sophia and wondered if I might want to contribute. I hung up before he could finish the sentence. When Claire had her second child, a boy named Jackson, she mailed me a birth announcement. The photo was perfectly staged, matching designer outfits, bright smiles, the picture of a flawless family. On the back, scrawled in someone's neat handwriting, were 5 words: "Hope you're doing well." An afterthought, nothing more. I kept that card, along with everyone before it, the meaningless gifts, the hollow words, all filed away as evidence. 4 years after losing Ethan, I had rebuilt my life piece by piece. I was now principal of a thriving middle school, earning enough to live comfortably, though I still lived modestly. I'd risen from the ashes of what they'd left me, creating purpose from devastation. But I never stopped watching. Through quiet observation, I learned that Jeffrey had climbed the corporate ladder, promoted to vice president. He and Claire had bought a bigger house in a gated neighborhood. My parents had joined an exclusive golf club and filled their days with luxury vacations, beaches, cruises, Europe. Their world was glossy and effortless. Then, one early spring morning, everything shifted. An unfamiliar email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "Important family matter." I almost deleted it. I'd learned to ignore anything that mentioned family, but instinct stopped me. "Emily," the message began, "this is your Aunt Teresa. I thought you should know. Your father lost his job 3 months ago. He's been keeping it quiet, but things are bad. His retirement savings were entirely tied up in company stock, and when the firm went bankrupt, the stock went with it. Your parents have lost nearly everything. They're on the verge of foreclosure. I know things haven't been good between you, but I thought you'd want to know. Your father's too proud to reach out himself, but they really need help. Please call me if you can. Love, Teresa." I read the email 3 times, letting the words sink in. Then I turned to my computer and started searching. It didn't take long. Article after article detailed the collapse of the regional manufacturing firm where my father had worked for decades. A fraud scandal, federal indictments, bankruptcy. Thousands of employees had lost their jobs and their life savings. There it was, his name, listed among the senior executives who'd seen their retirements wiped out overnight. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling the strange, quiet symmetry of it all. After years of living in luxury built atop the ashes of my son's memory, they'd finally lost everything. Some would call it karma, others, justice. I didn't know what to call it. It wasn't joy, not even relief. It felt more like recognition, a moment of cosmic balance finally settling into place. The universe, it seemed, had finally remembered my name. A week later, my phone began to ring. My mother's number. I watched it flash across the screen, then fade to voicemail. She called again the next day, and again after that. I didn't answer. Then, one evening in May, there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw my father, older, grayer, smaller somehow. The confident man I remembered had been replaced by someone worn thin. I opened the door but kept the chain in place. Yes? Emily. His voice broke on my name. Please, we need to talk. About what? Can I come in? No. He winced, then nodded slightly. I know things haven't been good between us. I know we made mistakes, but we're family, and we need help. Help? I echoed, the word foreign and bitter on my tongue. He swallowed. I lost my job. You probably heard. We're in serious financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure, my father said quietly. Your mother's insurance ended when I lost my job, and she has some medical issues that need attention. We're asking our daughters for help. I said nothing, and he hurried on. Claire and Jeffrey are helping as much as they can, but they have 2 kids to care for. We thought maybe you could contribute something, even a small amount. A loan, perhaps. We'd pay you back once things improve. I studied him through the narrow opening of the chained door. When my situation improves? He nodded quickly. I know you're doing better now. I saw online that you're a principal. That must pay decently. We wouldn't be asking if we weren't desperate. Desperate, I repeated softly. That's an interesting word. I remember what that feels like. Color crept up his neck. Emily, please. This isn't the time to rehash the past, isn't it? I asked, a thin smile forming. You're standing here begging for money because you're losing everything. That sounds familiar. This is different, he said, his voice tightening. How? I asked. Because you're my parents? Ethan was your grandson. The silence that followed was deep and heavy, filled with all the things neither of us had ever said. Finally, I asked, how much do you need? Hope flickered in his tired eyes. We owe about $90,000 on the house. If we can come up with that, we can stop the foreclosure. But even $20,000 or $30,000 would help us buy time. $90,000. More than what could have saved Ethan's life. I felt something inside me click into place. Cold, steady, inevitable. I'll think about it, I said, and then I closed the door. Leaning back against the wall, I let out a slow breath that turned into a smile. After 4 long years of waiting, of rebuilding, of turning pain into resolve, the moment had finally come. The reckoning had begun. I didn't reach out to them for 2 weeks. Let them wait. Let them stew in their uncertainty. Let them taste the same helplessness they once left me drowning in. Each day that passed tightened the vice around their lives. I knew because I checked the public foreclosure notices daily. Their house, the home of my childhood, had been officially scheduled for auction in 45 days. In those 2 weeks, my mother called 17 times. My father, 9. Claire sent 3 long, self-righteous messages insisting that our parents were good people who'd simply made mistakes, that families should forgive and help one another. The irony seemed entirely lost on her. I ignored every call, every plea. Instead, I focused on gathering information. I studied their finances, piecing together what I could from public records and online databases. The house was valued around $320,000, with a remaining mortgage balance of about $90,000. They still had equity, but not enough to buy another home in a desirable area. Once the foreclosure went through, they'd be forced into a small apartment, somewhere cheaper, somewhere ordinary. They would live on Social Security checks and whatever my father could earn. If anyone would hire a 63-year-old former executive tainted by scandal, it would be difficult for them, humbling, a complete dismantling of the comfort and privilege they'd wrapped themselves in. But they wouldn't die from it. That was the difference. Ethan hadn't had the luxury of discomfort. His suffering had been terminal. They would survive. They just wouldn't thrive. On the 15th day, I finally returned my father's call. "Emily," he breathed when he answered, relief and panic tangled in his voice. "Thank God. I wasn't sure you'd ever call." He sounded exactly as I'd imagined. Small, nervous, desperate. "Thank God," my father said, exhaling audibly. "I was so worried you wouldn't call." "I've been thinking about your request," I said evenly. "And?" I could hear the hope trembling in his voice, fragile, unguarded, almost pitiful. "I want to meet," I said. "All of you, Mom, and Claire, we need to talk face to face." "Of course," he said quickly. "Of course. When? Where? We can come to you, or somewhere neutral, whatever's best. My apartment, Saturday at 2. We'll be there," he promised. "Thank you, Emily. You don't know what this means to us." I hung up without replying. Saturday came cold and gray, fitting weather for what was about to unfold. I spent the morning setting the stage. 3 chairs arranged neatly in my small living room, a folder on the coffee table, documents printed and organized in order. Everything ready. They arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. My father looked even more diminished than the last time I'd seen him, his once tailored suit now hanging off his thinner frame. My mother had aged sharply, her hair streaked with gray, her face drawn with worry. Claire looked uneasy, overdressed for my modest apartment, clutching her designer handbag as if it could protect her. "Emily," my mother said softly, stepping forward as if to hug me. I stepped back. "Sit down." They obeyed, settling close together on my worn couch, like nervous students awaiting discipline. Which, in a way, they were. I stayed standing. "You asked me for $90,000. My father leaned forward. "We know it's a lot, but we're prepared to offer collateral, to sign a formal loan agreement. We'll pay you back with interest." "How?" I asked flatly. "You don't have jobs." "Mom's not working. What would you use to pay me back?" "I'm looking," he said quickly. "Something will come through." "At 63?" I asked. "With your name attached to a fraud scandal?" He flinched. That wasn't my fault. I had no idea what the CEO was doing. "Ignorance," I said quietly, "isn't innocence. You were a senior executive. You should have known." Then I reached for the folder on the coffee table and opened it. "But we're not here to talk about your career," I said evenly. "We're here to talk about your request for money." My mother's voice came out small. "Will you help us, Emily?" "That depends," I replied, sliding the folder open. "I have a few questions first." I pulled out the first document and laid it flat on the coffee table. "Do you remember this conversation?" "May 16th, 4 years ago. I came to you asking for $85,000, the amount needed for Ethan's treatment." The color drained from my mother's face. "Emily, we've been through this." "Have we?" I interrupted. "Because I don't think we have." "Not truthfully." I held up the page, a printed copy of my old crowdfunding campaign, the number $85,000 circled in red ink. "You told me you couldn't afford it. That you had to think about your retirement, that I needed to be realistic." "We made the best decision we could at the time," my father said stiffly. "Did you?" I asked, pulling out the next page. "This is a receipt from Claire's wedding planner. Total cost, $230,000, paid in full by you. 18 months after you told me you couldn't afford to save your grandson." Claire shot to her feet. "That's not fair. You're twisting everything." "Sit down," I said, my tone sharp as glass. She hesitated, then sat. "I'm not done." One by one, I spread the documents across the coffee table. Venue, 80,000, flowers, 15, catering, 40, dress, 12, photographer, 8, entertainment, 10. Shall I continue? My father's composure cracked. "What do you want from us, Emily? An apology? Fine. We're sorry. We made a mistake. Is that what you need to hear?" "A mistake," I repeated softly. "You think choosing a party over your grandson's life was a mistake?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't know he was going to die," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "You did. The doctors told you. I told you. You knew. And you chose not to care." I reached into the folder again and pulled out the one page that still had the power to break me. A photograph of Ethan lying in his hospital bed 2 weeks before he died. I laid it gently on the table, face up. "This," I said quietly, "is what $85,000 would have saved. This child, your grandson. Do you remember him?" My mother began to cry immediately, muffled sobs breaking through her trembling hands. Claire turned her head away. My father just stared at the photo, his expression unreadable. Blank, maybe, or too full to show. "Emily, please," my mother whispered through her tears. "We know we failed you. We know we should have done more, but we can't change the past. All we can do now is ask for your mercy." "Mercy," I repeated softly, returning the photo to the folder with care. "That's an interesting word. I don't recall receiving much of it when I begged you for help, when I sold everything I owned, when I maxed out every credit card, when I lived on ramen so Ethan could have his medicine. We didn't realize how bad it was," my father said weakly. "Didn't you?" I asked, my voice calm. "I told you again and again. I showed you the bills. I spelled out exactly what would happen if he didn't get treatment. What part of he will die was too complicated to grasp. Silence, heavy and absolute. But you understood the wedding details perfectly, didn't you?" I continued. "You knew the centerpieces had to be flawless, the venue immaculate, the dress exquisite. You knew your other daughter deserved nothing but the best money could buy." I sat down across from them, folding my hands on the table. "Here's what I've learned in the last 4 years," I said evenly. "You didn't refuse because you couldn't help Ethan. You refused because you wouldn't. It wasn't about money. You had the money. You proved that. It was about choice. You chose what mattered to you." "That's not true," Claire burst out, her voice rising. "They were trying to protect their retirement," Claire said, her voice tight. "Were they?" I asked quietly. "Because they spent nearly 3 times their supposed retirement savings on your wedding. Math doesn't lie, Claire, and neither do priorities." My father leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Emily, I understand that you're angry. You have every right to be. But are you really going to punish us now, when we're at our lowest? Are you going to be as cruel as you think we were?" "Cruel," I repeated, rolling the word slowly, tasting its weight. "Is it cruel to make choices based on what matters most to you? Is it cruel to decide that your resources are yours to direct, that someone else's crisis isn't your problem? Because that's what you taught me. That's the lesson you gave me when Ethan was dying." My mother's voice broke. "So, you're not going to help us?" "I didn't say that." I reached into the folder and withdrew the check I'd prepared days earlier. "I'm willing to give you the $90,000. Hope flickered instantly across their faces, raw, visible, desperate. "However," I continued, "there are conditions." "Anything," my father said at once. "We'll agree to whatever you want." "Payment plan, interest, collateral." "It's not about payment." I placed the check on the coffee table between us, the paper stark and heavy in the dim light. It was made out for $90,000, dated today. "The first condition," I said slowly, "is that you admit, right here and now, that you chose Claire's wedding over Ethan's life, that you had the money and you refused to help. I want to hear you say it." They froze. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father stared down at the check as though it might vanish. Claire looked from one parent to the other. "You don't have to do this," she said sharply. "She's trying to humiliate you." "Yes," I said simply, "I am. Just like you humiliated me when I stood in your doorway, begging for help with medical bills, and you told me to be realistic. Just like you humiliated me when I buried my son while you toasted at a rehearsal dinner." I leaned forward, my voice low and even. "So, yes. I want you to say it, out loud, that you made a choice, and that Ethan died because of it." My mother's sobs had grown louder, her face streaked with mascara. My father's skin was flushed, his jaw clenched, shame and rage warring beneath the surface. But the check lay between us like oxygen in a sealed room. They needed it too much to walk away. "We chose the wedding," my father said finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We had the money, and we spent it on Claire's wedding instead of Ethan's treatment." "And?" I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "And he died because we didn't help." I turned to my mother. "Mom?" She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "We should have helped you. We should have saved him. We were wrong." Then my gaze shifted to Claire. "And you? What's your role in this?" "I didn't know," she said quickly. "I didn't know they refused to help Ethan." "Didn't you?" I asked, my tone steady. "You never wondered where the money for your extravagant wedding came from? You never thought it strange that I begged you to move your bachelorette party because Ethan was in the hospital, and you refused? You never questioned having your wedding 3 days after your nephew's funeral?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Silence filled the space she couldn't. "Here's the second condition," I said, my voice cool and precise. "You take this money, save your house, and then you never contact me again. No birthday cards, no Christmas gifts, no calls, no messages. You erase me completely, the same way you erased Ethan. You go back to pretending I never existed." "Emily, you can't mean that," my mother cried. "We're family." "No," I said. "We share DNA. Family is something else entirely. Family shows up, family sacrifices. Family doesn't let a child die while they're picking out centerpieces." I stood and walked to the door, holding it open. "Those are my conditions. Take the check or leave it. You have 60 seconds to decide." They exchanged glances, an entire silent conversation flickering between them. Pride, fear, calculation. I watched it all, the way one watches the final act of a predictable play. It took them 43 seconds. My father reached out and picked up the check, his hand shaking slightly. "We accept your conditions," he said, his voice hollow. "Good," I replied evenly. "There's a document on the table next to the check, a formal agreement confirming you'll have no further contact with me. Sign it, sign it." They didn't even skim the pages. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they were. My father's signature trembled across the line, the pen shaking in his hand. My mother's tears made her writing blotched and uneven. Claire signed last, fast, hard strokes carved into the paper, her jaw tight with anger. When they were done, I gathered the document, glanced at their signatures, and handed over the check. "You can go now." "Emily," my father began, his voice breaking. "You agreed to the conditions," I interrupted. "No contact means no contact." Leave they rose slowly, silent. My mother wept quietly, dabbing at her face. My father's shoulders sagged, all pretense of dignity gone. Claire stalked past them, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, fury radiating off her. I waited until the door closed behind them. Then I turned the lock. In the quiet that followed, I walked to my bedroom and opened my laptop. My bank account loaded on the screen. The transfer had gone through that morning. $90,000 gone. The balance left behind, $12,000. Years of discipline, of denial, of slow rebuilding, reduced to a handful of digits. But it wasn't over. I opened my email and started a new message. The recipient, Aunt Teresa, the only one who had shown genuine kindness when Ethan was sick. I attached a file, the letter I'd written months earlier, waiting for this exact moment. Subject: What really happened? Aunt Teresa, I wanted you to know the truth about Ethan. What happened and what didn't. I've attached a complete timeline of events, including every request I made for help and every response I received. You'll also find documentation of the expenses Mom and Dad made during that same time, especially concerning Claire's wedding. The family deserves to know what really happened. Please share this with anyone you think should see it. Love, Emily. I clicked send. The attached document was meticulous. Months of careful work. Every conversation recorded, every denial documented, every invoice, every medical statement, every wedding expense cross-referenced, and at the very end, Ethan's photo. The image of my son lying small and pale beneath hospital sheets, tethered to machines that could no longer save him, the picture of what $85,000 might have changed, screenshots of my mother's Facebook posts calling Sophia her first grandchild, a copy of the funeral timeline showing how my parents attended Claire's rehearsal dinner instead of coming to Ethan's reception. Every lie, every omission, every proof, assembled in perfect chronological order, impossible to dispute. Aunt Teresa's family circle was wide. She was the kind of woman who forwarded everything, emails, photos, recipes, gossip, to half the extended family. She shared on Facebook, commented on every post, and tagged everyone she knew. By the next day, the truth would no longer belong to me alone. Their friends would see it, their golf partners, their church congregation, their neighbors. The truth would ripple outward, devouring the glossy image they'd spent decades maintaining. The check I'd handed over would clear, they'd save the house, but they'd lose something far more valuable: their reputation, their comfort, the illusion of being kind, selfless people. Everyone would finally know the truth about what they'd chosen and what they'd discarded. An hour later, there was a sharp knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Claire standing there, her face flushed with anger. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "You signed an agreement not to contact me," I said. "That email," she hissed. "You can't do that. You're ruining their lives." "I told the truth," I said. "There's a difference." "You're vindictive and cruel," she shot back. "You're destroying them out of spite." "No," I said evenly. "I'm giving them what they gave me: consequences. Actions have them, Claire. They made choices. Now they get to live with those choices." She stared at me, breathing hard, speechless in her fury. "They gave you $90,000, she finally spat. I met her eyes. "They gave me back a fraction of what they stole from Ethan." "From me," I added quietly. "And they only did it because they had no other choice. If they weren't desperate, do you really think they'd have lifted a finger?" We both know the answer. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You're never going to let this go, are you? You're going to hate us forever." "I don't hate you," I said, and to my surprise, I realized it was true. Hate requires caring. "I don't care anymore. You stopped being my family the day you chose a party over my son's life. Now you're just strangers who happen to share my last name. Mom's devastated. Dad looks broken. Was that worth it?" "Ask Ethan," I said softly. "Oh, wait. You can't. He's dead." Claire's face crumpled. "You really are as heartless as they said." "Heartless." I stepped closer. "My heart shattered 4 years ago, and none of you were there to see it. You were too busy planning your perfect wedding and your perfect life. So don't lecture me about being heartless, Claire. You don't get to use that word." She stared at me for a long moment, her mouth trembling, then turned and walked away. I closed the door, for the final time, on what remained of my biological family. In the months that followed, I heard things through whispers, through people who still had contact with them. The fallout had been exactly what I expected. My parents became pariahs, friends stopped visiting, their golf club quietly didn't renew their membership, even church became uncomfortable, too many side glances, too many whispers, until they stopped going altogether. They'd kept the house, but it became more of a cell than a home, a monument to the life they'd built and lost. My father eventually found work as a consultant, earning a fraction of his old income. My mother developed anxiety so severe she started therapy. Claire and Jeffrey moved out of state, trying to outrun the gossip. Their annual Christmas cards, the glossy ones with posed family photos and scripted holiday cheer, stopped arriving entirely. Someone told me later that my mother had begun telling people I was dead. It was easier, apparently, than admitting the truth, that her surviving daughter wanted nothing to do with her. In a way, she wasn't wrong. The woman I'd once been, the one who'd apologized, endured, settled for scraps, had died with Ethan. The woman who remained had built something else, something strong, something hers. In time, I even began dating again, cautiously, carefully, like someone relearning how to walk after a long fall. I built a new life, surrounded by people who stayed when things got difficult, the kind of friends who didn't vanish when the world turned dark. I traveled to the places Ethan would have adored: quiet beaches, mountain trails, open skies, leaving pieces of his ashes in each beautiful corner of the world. I lived for him and for me. The $90,000 I'd given my parents turned out to be worth every cent, not because they earned it, but because it brought me closure. It proved what I needed to know, that I was capable of compassion even when they hadn't been. I was the one who showed mercy when they'd shown none. And then I walked away, letting them carry the weight of what they'd done. Some might say that was cruel, that forgiveness should come without terms, that true grace means helping even when you've been wronged. But those people never sat beside a dying child while laughter echoed from a wedding hall. They never had to choose between paying for heat or buying medicine. They never stood at a gravesite they could barely afford, knowing $250,000 had gone to champagne and flowers. I gave my parents exactly what they asked for: help, but on my terms. I fulfilled the final duty of a daughter and then closed that door forever, the same way they'd closed theirs on Ethan. In the end, revenge wasn't about vengeance at all. It was about balance, justice, making sure cause and consequence finally aligned. They were the ones who taught me that love came with conditions, that family was only family when convenient, that some lives simply mattered less. I only reflected their own lessons back to them, neatly packaged in a check they couldn't refuse and a truth they couldn't run from. And then I stepped into a future they would never share, carrying Ethan's memory like a quiet flame, at last. At peace.